everybody. This is Savigne with Florida Flight Center. Today, we're going to have a special guest, Mr. Bolling DeSouza with AeroSolutions. I want to thank you for joining us, Bolling. Say hello.
Thank you for inviting me on this. Pleasure to be here. Happy to talk about airplanes.
Excellent, excellent. So we're going to get into it today. The conversation might get a little lengthy, so we're going to put some timestamps here in the corner if you want to jump ahead to a particular section. So, all right, great. So let's get started. Bolling, why don't you tell our viewers, the channel here, a little bit about yourself, about AeroSolutions before we get started.
Sure. I've been in corporate aviation, selling airplanes since 1993. Basically, my father worked for Pan Am, and so I was very familiar with commercial aviation and didn't really think about corporate aviation until my brother, who was 4 years younger, came home one day and said he was learning to fly. And for me, airplanes were Pan Am 747, and I said, what is he flying? A 172? I'm like, well, let me go check it out. And I was in 1992, and obviously the flying bug caught my attention. I started learning to fly, and I'd been out of college for 2 years and thought, I was pursuing some other ventures, but thought selling airplanes might be an interesting option. And the only time I really applied for a job, I opened up the newspaper, and a local sales company had an opportunity. So applied, and it was 100% commission, and went to work for them. And that was 93. My brother came on board in 94 at that same company. And in 99, we went off on our own and formed AeroSolutions. And basically, we've been, doing this ever since. So our milestones, in 2004, we built our hangar facility at the Manassas Regional Airport. We have a 14,000 square foot hangar. And that was really helped us kind of expand our footprint. We were doing 20 to 25 deals a year, and with the brick and mortar, we literally doubled that. And so that was a big step for us. And ultimately, our original niche was helping people transition from their turboprops to their first light jets and beyond. So, and ironically, 2020 was our, in spite of all the challenges of the marketplace, was our best year ever. So we did 58 deals. So we feel that obviously corporate aviation is here to stay.
Well, good. With that, that's a great segue. Let's jump right into it. So let's talk about, kind of recap what happened in 2020 and your overall thoughts of the market.
So we always factor in for election years that things might be a little slower in the quarter leading up to the election, just because people like to hold off on the purchasing decision, seeing who's going to be in the White House. So we had already, I just from having done this now for almost 30 years, figured, okay, we'll take 30% off of our projected revenue for 2020 because we're going to lose a quarter. And of course, in COVID hit in March, and absolutely the market came to a screeching halt, and we thought, well, okay, the 30% we took off might not be enough. And then things started to pick up again in April, and then by the time we hit basically the second half of the year, things picked up. And as I said, we had our best year ever. We did 58 deals. We had been the previous 3 years, we've always done between 45 and 50, but the previous 3 years we had done 48. And so 50 was a nice jump in sales volume. And but more importantly, we had a 20% jump in revenue. And so our best year had been in 2019 revenue wise, and we did 20% better. So it was a very big surprise that the marketplace had reacted the way it did, considering the economic challenges of COVID. And ultimately, I think the reality is most people would prefer to fly in their own airplane, but COVID, I think, created that justification. And even with the backdrop of economic challenges, people prioritized transport, and that's clearly what brought the market to the numbers that we saw. And I think what we, in our analysis, was that 50% of the buyers that came to the table were new to corporate aviation, and so that clearly was a shot in the arm for the marketplace, and that's actually continued into 2021.
So I noticed on the chart you sent that you said about 50%. Would you consider that to be under normal circumstances? Is that normal? What would you say the weighting is in a normal year?
In a normal year, it's probably about 10 to 15%. And so to have half of the demand
of new buyers,
that you would have that much level of activity, you have what we've experienced more often than not is transactions happening. Someone, I would say that, airplanes, corporate aviation is like today you have a tricycle, now you go to a bicycle, then you go to a motorcycle. There's always a step up. And that's what a lot of our activity would always be centered around, clients that were either upgrading or downgrading or adjusting their needs. The amount of first-time buyers that have come to the table was something we had not seen before. And of course, once again, who wants to ride around with 150 of their best potential COVID buddies on a commercial airline? And so it makes perfect sense that the demand. But what was surprising is that we've had clients that have done exceptionally, or actually we had one client in particular is in the furniture business. At the beginning of COVID, they were calling me for valuations of their airplanes. They thought that maybe they were going to have to sell everything, and in corporate aviation, they would have to close their flight department. By the time the second half of the year, they were not only keeping everything they had, but they're adding more to their fleet. And so it was just a very interesting dynamic. But we did have customers that their travel patterns changed with everyone staying at home, Zoom calls, and they did divest. But I would say for every one client that divested, 5 stepped up in their place. So in our little corner of the world of deals that we worked on.
Yeah, it was certainly a very interesting year. Just the comment you made, anticipating a down in the kind of third quarter, let's say, right before the election, and then all of a sudden the third quarter ends up being one of the best quarters ever. Very interesting.
Absolutely. And of course, then what's really fascinating is that, so I took a vacation the first week of January thinking that we could not have had that much activity in the fourth quarter. And that historically speaking had always been that you get a lot of people for tax purposes do a deal in the fourth quarter, and that kind of takes some energy out of the first quarter. And so you typically have a quiet first quarter. But to my absolute surprise, I'm on vacation, it was January 4th, it was that first Monday of the new year, and the phone is ringing, with guys wanting to buy Gulfstreams and Citations and King Airs. And I spent the whole week, basically sending out acquisition agreements because people were ready to do deals. And to my shock, everything was, I would send it out and then it would come right back. Let's get it done. And so, of course, I had to explain to the customer that we had to let the dust settle because everything in many markets had been picked over. And we just, the supply actually, and that's still the case right now. We have a shortage of supply. If in certain markets, you will not have an option that's really, worthy of being bought at this point. And so it's just, it's again, the market is in a state of affairs that I've never seen. And probably one example just of this intense activity. We had a Citation Sovereign Plus, a 2015, which is a very desirable airplane, but it was a late model. And when we listed it in August, the client wanted $10 million, and the best I was getting was about $8.5 million, and that was in August. And actually, I listed it in July. So July, August, things were kind of not a whole lot going on, kind of some lowball offers. And we knew that Textron had 3 whitetails sitting in Wichita that they were willing to, they were trying to sell. So we knew, and there was, I think, 6 other airplanes for sale. So it was a kind of a saturated market. And so as time marched on, then we heard that Textron sold the 3 whitetails, and all of a sudden we started seeing, we had, so in, I guess, October, we got an offer of 9.2, and then in November, we got an offer of 9.5 and a 9.7. In December, all of a sudden, we had the magic $10 million number, and we ended up selling. And so today, if you go to try to find a Sovereign Plus, I think 1 came on the market since the beginning of the year. And so just a complete turnaround. And these, this type of storyline, a Citation CJ2, light jet, you could, last year, and call it June, July, you'd probably pay less than $2 million for one. And now there's just nothing to buy, and you're going to spend 2, 3, 2, 4 for the same airplane. And of course, at some point, there'll be some equilibrium in the market, but it's just a fascinating analysis to see what has happened, because I don't think anyone that's been in this business, certainly for the last, downturns, in 2008 and 2001 prior to that, would have ever forecasted that we would have some, in a challenging time, this type of outcome.
Right. So let's transition. I know we've talked a little bit about 2021, but how are you seeing the first part of the year here, this first quarter, and then what do you see for the rest of the year?
So, I always joke with my clients that, we try to give good advice, and, if my crystal ball worked perfectly, I would, be doing something else. But, and we, as, 2020 started, coming to an end, and we saw all this activity, some of our thoughts were, we told clients, maybe we should, hold off just to see, because this can't continue, right? There's, why fight for the end of year deal? Let's let the calendar page turn and see what happens in 2021. Wait for inventories to kind of come back up and not be competing, for a scarce product. And of course, that unfortunately has not been the case. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what side of the table you're on, if you're a seller, you're very happy that the markets continue to be engaged. And the model that we were envisioning is what we've seen for the last, certainly since the recession in 08, that, first quarter tends to be a little softer and prices soften up a little bit in first and second quarter. That is not the case right now. The marketplaces continue to be energized. I think it's driven a little bit by the fact that you still have a lot of new interest in corporate aviation that may not have pulled the trigger in 2020 now is, definitely justifying it in 2021. They had a good year in 2020. They were feeling on solid ground. So that's creating demand. I think the government's PPP programs, really helped, I think, stabilize business in the first round last year. And then we've had now the second round. So I think a lot of that cash is in the marketplace. So helping build confidence. COVID, vaccination is underway. So, people, I think, have a positive outlook, and positive outlooks always create, the desire, to kind of expand and, and buying an airplane, it fits in that category. So we don't see the marketplace slowing down, for this year. And so what our advice now to customers is, you should, if you're interested in buying an airplane and you need it in service this year, waiting is not going to be a good strategy. You should don't go buy the wrong airplane just because there's nothing else. There's always airplanes coming on the market, but be ready to engage and, get yourself lined up to be the ready buyer that the sellers are looking for, and engage in the marketplace. And because ultimately, if the economy is kind of coming back, from the COVID restrictions, and if businesses that were previously shuttered are coming back to life, that's going to create more economic activity. And so we see the second half of the year, being a relatively positive outlook, and that's going to create more demand. Then you get into some of the tax ramifications. Right now, you have the 100% write-off for airplanes, and that's still, available this year. There's always the, possibility that with the new administration in Washington, that they may change some of the tax laws. So I think that's going to create some further demand through the end of the year. So now, what will happen in 2022, is anyone's guess. But I think that there should be no reason that values are going to soften, this year. So if you're a buyer, I would absolutely engage the marketplace. And if you're a seller, obviously, you could play the game of trying to see what happens at the end of the year. But right now, things are solid, so I wouldn't hold off. Recommendations: if you have a reason to sell and the number makes sense, take your deal and move on. So.
And what do we talked a little bit just before this about the new buyers. How do you see that ratio changing this year?
I think you're going to see, still, my guess is probably not going to be quite that 50% number that we, analyzed. I think it's probably going to be a little less, because I think a lot of that initial impetus is, probably not there this time around for this year. And I think you're going to have, with, once again, hopefully COVID being put to rest, or definitely being greatly diminished, people are going to feel more comfortable flying on the airlines. So you're going to have less of a justification for, I think some people that may have gone the corporate aviation route by chartering will probably be content to going back to first class on United Airlines or Delta. And so I think you're going to have a little bit of a pullback in that. I think what you're going to see is probably just the more of the normal mix of, so if I were to surmise, it'll probably be 1/3 new, 2/3 existing. Is kind of what I would predict for 2021.
Like that normal corporate business aviation will kind of ramp back up to normal, and then maybe some of the new buyers might ease up a little bit.
And one sector of the market that was not as active, but there was activity, but not as active as the light and mid-size, is the large cabin. And the expectation is that that will probably be a market that will be fairly engaged with people. With the world opening up again, you now have a place to go with your airplane, and where you could have a beautiful Gulfstream, but where exactly you're going to take it, And so I think we're going to see that. That's probably one sector that will probably see a lot of growth certainly in the second half of the year, and we're already seeing it now. We've got clients, making jumps from the light jets to large cabin, and want to definitely take advantage of, basically I guess, they've got enough cabin fever now. They're ready to explore the world.
Very well, very well. Any other comments or insights or things that you might have for?
Yeah, I think, the one, this is an article that you might have read, and, the one comment that, where will how the market cannot continue at this feverish pace. And we know that, the manufacturers are ramping up production to meet new airplane demand, which is only a small portion of the overall market. Typically in the corporate jet market, you've got 2,000 transactions a year, plus or minus. And, new airplane sales probably amount to, 200 or 300 units. So it's, a small portion, but the manufacturers are ramping up production. So they're anticipating, a demand that probably will be there for the foreseeable future, more so than what had been for the last couple of years. But the one thing that we are maybe anticipating, that where there'll be some downward pressure on the market, is the new buyers that jumped in and then basically, thought, that buying the airplane was the most expensive piece of the puzzle, and not realizing with it, it could cost $500,000 to $1 million a year to operate it. And, so, that dynamic is, probably going to cause some people to reevaluate if they should have really bought an airplane, if they really do need an airplane, for their mission, and evaluating, the cost benefit analysis. So we think that, but that, I don't really think that will have a meaningful impact until next year.
2022.
Because I think people have to go through a cycle of ownership, and fuel prices are low, so I don't think the cost of fuel is probably not going to be the biggest deterrent. It's probably when they go in for maintenance and they get a $300,000-$400,000 bill for their C check, or 48-month inspection, or whatever be the case. And so that's kind of, but that's obviously, we'll have to see if that pans out.
Yeah. I read the article. It's an interesting take.
So, I mean, it makes sense, just because, even in normal times, you get, a certain percentage of people that think that, that's the right decision. Let's buy the airplane, and then they're not using it enough to justify the expense. And time will tell.
Time will tell. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap it up here. If anybody wants to get in touch with Bolling, we will leave all his contact information down below in the description. And any other closing comments before we go?
Well, in sales, we make hay while we can. So we're working hard to meet the demand as it is right now.
There was a lot of hay that was made in 2020. Let's hope for a good year in 2021.
Absolutely.
And we wish well to all the buyers and sellers out there as well. Well, with that, folks, we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time. We'll see you on the next one.